Cool. 7:02. One second. Alrighty. So hi everyone. Welcome to week 8.2. This is meant to be like the official last class before we start open source, but we might do a few more things. For example, how to deploy things on the server, what is Next.js, maybe some TRPC or something similar, because most open source projects have started using these, and if we dive directly into open source, it will boggle your head. So even though this was meant to be sort of the last class before we start open source, was meant to be introduction to Monorepos in the original sort of plan as well. We are going to have a few more classes after this before we dive in. A few people wanted a break before the open source section. You can consider that as a break, although it might be good for you to cover these classes. For example, Next.js, and if we learn TRPC, we might learn ESLint, Prettier, things like these, either through offline videos or through a live video. But either way, these are things you probably should know before you dive deeper into an open source project. Cool. Specifically, today's class is about this thing called Monorepos and how big projects are structured, specifically open source projects. If you look at cal.com or Backpack or any big open source project, which by big I mean it has multiple parts, it could have multiple websites, it could have a backend as well, it could have a folder that contains types. It's basically a bunch of things. Any big complex application that you look at out on the internet generally is a single GitHub repository. There's like a lot of sort of debate around whether you should have your backend and front end in the same repository or different ones. And the general sort of winner over there has been, okay, you should contain your backend and front end in the same repository. And for that reason itself, monorepos were introduced to TypeScript or JavaScript. So what are monorepos? Monorepos let you contain and sort of have multiple modules in your folder, in your repository, which could be the backend, the front end, the Next.js app, the React app, the normal web app, so on and so forth. Cool. Before we dive into that though, it's a good idea for you to know how things used to happen before monorepos were introduced. So the first part of this sort of today's lecture, we are going to understand how things happened in the pre-monorepo era, when monorepos were introduced after npm 7.0, I think. Before that, there was no concept of monorepo. People used to either shove their repositories together like we have. So if you look at the week 8 assignment, the week 8 repo, we just shoved the client and the server right next to each other. So people either did this, or they had different repositories for their client code and their server code. After npm 7, workspaces were a bunch of things were introduced that let you do everything in the same repository and somehow let you import code between each other. But before that, the way for you to write reusable code or like do what monorepos let you do now was by publishing everything to npm. So let's understand what that is. Before that, why packages or modules? Before that, what even are packages and modules? Hopefully a few of you went through the YouTube video that I shared with you guys, which was this video right here. Here I went through the cal.com code base and basically showed you all the small modules that exists there and what they, I think, do. Now I don't work there, neither have I gone through the complete code base. But if you look at the cal.com code base, it's not a simple client folder and a simple server folder. There are a bunch of folders here, but the most important things happen in this packages folder and in this apps folder. If you look at the packages folder, it has small directories called modules. Now let's understand what are modules and how we can bring them to our to-do application that we have created last week. Okay, cool. But why modules? Reusable code. If you put some reusable chunk that, let's say, your front end and back end both need into a single module, you have a place where you have reusable code. Then there is the standard industry jargon, separation of concern, which basically means each module does what it's supposed to do. For example, if I go to cal.com's repository here, the day.js module, for example, contains all their time zone specific functions. Cal.com is a very global application. I could book a meeting with you when I'm in India, you are in the US. So it needs to handle time zones well. All that logic is in this module. There is an emails module here that contains all their React components that are finally sent out as emails. So that's the benefit of, or that's what separation of concern is. Each module does what it's supposed to do. And teams can work independently on modules. That's another big benefit. If there is a front-end team that only understands front-end, even though the code is in the same repo, they will have a folder here or a module here where they can work. They don't necessarily have to look at the backend code. So that's the general benefit of packages, modules, and breaking your big app down into small submodules. Cool. Before we proceed, let's try to understand where we would need modules in our to-do application. So I would urge everyone at this point to clone this repo again if you haven't already. This is the week 8 repo. Let me post it in chat here. Everyone. Sorry. There you go. Oh, the chat wasn't closed. My bad. All right. So I've just pasted everything, pasted the repo link in chat. Please clone it or download it and open it in VS Code. I'm going to do the same thing. Going to give you guys 30 seconds. If you've done it already, feel free to go into these folders one by one and run npm install. I'm going to do the same thing. So you bring all the dependencies locally. All right. So we have a client folder, we have a server folder, and what does the server do? It does the backend stuff. Client has the React application, which does the front end stuff. Let's understand a new concept here called Zod inference. So yesterday, I told you guys you can make your backend code better, like more type safe and safe to attacks from end users by adding input validation. What is input validation? Whenever the user sends you some inputs, which in this case is username and password, you want to validate that they've sent the right things so that your app does not throw an exception at some point. So what can we do here? We first went to the server folder. Then we did an npm install Zod. I would urge you to do the same locally. And then we said import Z from Zod. And here did a const past response equal to Z dot safe. No, sorry. Before we do that, we describe the object, which is const body or sign input equal to Z dot object. I hope you guys remember this from yesterday. If you weren't present yesterday, this is what we did yesterday. We added input validation to our backend code. How did we do it? We used this library called Zod, which lets you describe the schema of the input and then does some very nice input validation for you. How does it do it? This is how we describe the schema, and this is how we do input validation. If past response dot success is not true, simply return whatever rest.json status 411.json message error while parsing. Hopefully this part is clear. We've done this yesterday. Why is this useful? If I start my backend application now, how do you start your backend application? You run tsc, then you do node dist/index.js and start it. I'm going to wait here. If you guys want to write this locally, feel free to. I just added these 3 lines, imported Zod here, and then finally did a save parts of the body that the user has sent. And if it is not successful, which means user did not send us a body that looked something like this, which had username as string, password as string. Then we return them error while parsing, or like whatever message you want to give them, give better inputs. And if that's not the case, we do the normal thing of storing the user in our database. Okay. Let's see why this is useful. If you go to Postman and you try to sign up with wrong body, something like this, send, you get back a message that says error while parsing. So we have a very nice input validation, at least on the backend. Now I want to introduce a use case of adding types to the front end. So this is our backend code. This is the input that it expects. If we look at the front end where we are making this sign up call, let's go to client src components and signup.tsx, this file. You will see we make the sign up call right here. So what do? We send a fetch request to /signup, which is a post request, and we send this body which has a username and a password. Cool. The problem here is not necessarily a problem, but like whoever is writing this code, the front end developer who's writing this code, doesn't really know the schema of this endpoint. How will they know what endpoint to call and what inputs and outputs to send without going through the backend code first? Looking at, okay, index.ts, these are the routes, going to the auth route and figuring out, okay, that's the input. What if you could introduce a type here in signup.tsx that would let the end user know, or the front end developer know, okay, this is what you need to send to the backend. Some people might ask why this is good enough. Yeah, this is good enough. But like eventually in big projects, you always have a type. Before you do anything anonymous or you do anything, you send any API response call out, it is good for you to have the type known here upfront versus you trying to go to the backend code and figuring it out. The question is, how do we get this type that's defined here? So this is one place where we've defined the type. Can we somehow import this type here more specifically, rather than me writing type input params, username string, password string, rather than me writing this and then doing, okay, const inputs of type input params is username something, password something, or whatever this comes from the state, and passing this input here. What if I could get this input params from the backend itself, so that I don't have to define it in two places? I've defined it here right now. I've defined it here. The problem is, if this schema changes, I have to make this change in two places. The other problem is, here we get const signup input, which is a variable. It's not a type. It does exist in the final JavaScript file, but this guy requires just a type. It requires either an interface or a type, something that vanishes when you convert from TypeScript to JavaScript. So the first thing we need to understand is something called Zod inference, which is, given this Zod object, can you somehow convert this into this? Can you somehow convert this type into this type without writing additional code? Because if I have to write additional code, that means I have to, if I'm making a change here, for example, I don't know, we expect the user to give their first name while signing up as well. I'll have to make that change in two places, which is something we don't want. So can you somehow directly get the type of these input params from this? And the answer is yes. Zod lets you do it. How? You simply call type, let's say sign up params equal to z.infer, and here you pass in type of the original Zod object. So if I hover over this now, it says, okay, sign up params is a type which has username, password, and first name. Cool. Let me remove first name. So what have we done? We have converted a Zod object, an actual physical object present in JavaScript or TypeScript, into a type which vanishes in TypeScript. But why is this useful? This is useful because this type I can now use in the front end, as long as we figure out a way for front end to get this type over here. If we can somehow import this sign up param from dot dot slash backend or some other way, then we're good to go. I don't have to specially define it here. And that's what we have to figure out how to do, how you can share code between backend and frontend. That's the primary purpose of packages and modules. Cool. So hopefully it is clear what we're trying to do, at least in this project right now. What are we trying to do? We're trying to write reusable code that can be used both in the front end and the back end, defining it somewhere and making sure that this code, it's only written in one place and can be used by both the backend and the front end. Cool. Let's try to figure out how to do that. Before that, feel free to write this much code. So you guys are where I am, which is import Zod, create the sign up input, do the right validation here, but more importantly, define the type. And how do you define the type? You can simply infer it. You could also totally be like type sign up params equal to username string, password string. But as I've said, the good thing here is I just have to make a change in one place. It all automatically goes to the other place. We still have to figure out how we make this reach the front end, but at least we understand, given just one input, how we can convert it into a type. And then we will figure out how we can send it to the front end. Cool. So take a pause here. Let's go back to the slides. What is Zod inference, or why do we need it? Zod inference specifically is converting an input like this into a type like this. Why is it needed? Because why did I introduce it here? I introduced it because our front end needs to have this type, the to do input type, and somehow needs to get it from somewhere. Some people might say, Harkirat, why do this at all? Can we not just import sign up input in the front end and call this here in the front end? The answer is yes, you can do it. You probably don't want sign up input there because this has a bunch of backend logic. You don't want all that backend logic in your front end. You simply just want the simple type, which is why it's a good idea to just import this much in the front end and just have this much in the backend, either present here or present in some other module that backend can import from. Cool. Let's take a pause here. What have we understood? We understood Zod inference, and more specifically how you can define a type given a Zod input. What do we have to do next? We have to figure out a way to import this in the front end. Let's see how you can do that. Let's create a new module called common. Now, what do I mean by module here? Just a new folder. So with me, we have the client folder here. We have the server folder here. Let's create a new folder and let's call it common. Okay. So I have 1, 2, 3 folders now. If I go to the common folder, it's currently empty. Every module, every folder in a monorepo, and generally what we're doing here, needs to have a package.json, needs to have a tsconfig.json. So let's bootstrap all of that. How do you get a package.json? npm init-y will introduce a package.json here, and tsc-init will introduce the tsconfig.json. Cool. Now that we have bootstrapped the project, let's try to do some standard practices of how to write this common code. Now, what are we trying to write in common, or what does common represent? In most open source repositories, the common folder represents a folder, or like some places call it core, but it represents a folder which has your very small modules that are used by both client and server. So if you write a bunch of logic here, it's useful because client, server, a bunch of others import from it. If I have to take an example, if you go to the backpack repository, if you go to packages, you will see a common folder here, which has a bunch of small functions that all the other modules use. Similarly, we have described a common folder here where we will write our Zod types. Cool. So first thing, you can create a index.ts file here, but generally it's a good idea to create a source folder and have all of your TS files there. Why? I can explain later on. Generally, the reason you do this is because if you go to the server code right now, you see index.ts is right next to dist. So it's like hard to compare them. Okay, this index.ts got converted to index.js here. It's just ugly to have everything right next to dist, which is why it's a good idea to create a top level src, which is your source, and a top level dist, which is your final outcome. Cool. So this is why good idea to create a source folder, go to the source folder and create, an index.ts file. Cool. Hopefully you have created the common folder, created package.json, created tsconfig and source/index.ts. One thing you have to do now is go to tsconfig and tell it to pick all the ts files, not from the root folder, but from the src folder. How do you do it? You add another attribute here called root dir and you set it to source. Again, why are we doing it? Just for better separation of concern. Also, you'll see how when we publish this to npm or what we do next, it's better to have source and dist separate. So you can just ignore source and like some other benefits. Cool. All right. So I told the TypeScript to pick all the, I told the TypeScript compiler to pick all the TypeScript code from src, which has an index.ts file. Now here I have to define all my Zod types. Right now we only have one, but in the future we might have more, the to do input Zod type and a bunch of other things. Let's define all of them here. So the first thing you have to do is npm install Zod in common. So now common is its own package. It describes right now just the Zod inputs. So it needs to have Zod as a dependency. It cannot get Zod as a dependency from server or someplace else. It's a module in itself and it has its own node modules. And specifically the only module that's present here is Zod right now. If I go to the source folder, I need to now define all the types for my app. So in our case, that is from Zod. Let me just copy these over from auth.ts. It's basically these two things. Let me just cut them from here and paste them here. All right. So what have I done? I just brought over the Zod types from server to common. Why? Because the server can just import the Zod type from common and the client can also import it from common. Now you might ask, Harkirat, client could have simply imported it from the server itself. Why did I have to introduce a new common folder? The answer is you don't want client to import from server. Server has a bunch of server specific things that don't run in the browser. For example, Express, the HTTP server, and you don't ever want client to import server or vice versa. You don't want server to import any client side React components. That is why you need common. The things that are common between the two, you put there, and then both of these client and server can fetch the required modules from here. Cool. One thing this file needs to do now is export all of these. If you just define them here, if they're not exported, no one else can import it. So make sure you are exporting both this, and then now we'll see how we can import these in client and server. Cool. So hopefully by this point, you guys have index.ts file, which has all of this code, and you've exported both sign up input and sign up params. The next question is, how did code sharing like this happen in the pre-monorepo days? When you did not have monorepos, how would one module get another module's code? So until now, we've done this many times. If you remember, if you go to server/index.ts, at the top, we're importing from a bunch of libraries. These are also simple folders somewhere which have a bunch of TypeScript code, but eventually their code gets published somewhere. So how did this happen in the pre-monorepo era when these folders couldn't share code locally? You would publish your package to what's called npm, the node package manager registry, and other people could pull it by doing the standard npm install whatever. So what do we have to do now? We have to take this common code and we have to publish it to npm. So we have to create our own library that other people can use. Let's try to do that. Before we do that, just want to make sure everyone's good to go. I think this was straightforward, so nothing too fancy here. 80% are doing good. 19% are not doing good. Just going to do a quick check on what's up with the 19%, and then we'll proceed. Chat is open. All right. What is the point of front-end input validation? Since someone wants to do something Node.js, they'll still do it. Yes, it's just for the developer. TypeScript anyways won't give you any input validation, and we're not doing input validation. Even if TypeScript is there, it's only at compilation type that it works. When it reaches the browser, it's still JavaScript. So TypeScript won't really prevent the end user from doing anything. It's just for the developer. Okay, when they are writing the code, they know what inputs to send here, versus, okay, they'll have to figure out, okay, what does the sign up route require? Let me go to the backend code, figure it out. So types on the front end are only used for that. They are not used for any real time validation. TypeScript anyways doesn't have access to JavaScript during runtime, so it won't be able to do any validation. Quick revise. Too fast, quick revise. Okay, we will quickly revise everything before we proceed. From the top, any big open source project or generally any website that you should build also in the future should not be one very big folder that has everything, the front end and the back end. You can do it. That is how we have been doing things right now. What is the dumb way that we have written week 8 repo, the to-do app repo until now? We have a client folder, we have a server folder. This has all the front end logic and this has all the back end logic. The problem is they don't share any code right now. Until they share any code, it's all good. You don't need monorepos. You don't need any of what we're doing today. But a lot of times front end and back end need to share code. You might ask, what is that, Akirath? The answer is in this repo. If you look at cal.com, day.js is a library that lets you do, let's say, convert from one time zone to another. This might be required by backend functions also. This might be required by front end functions also. So you could either write these functions, whatever functions are exposed here. This just exposes like one library. But if this had like actual functions, you would have to rewrite them in both the front end and the back end. Just so you don't do it, you create what are called modules or packages. So anytime you know your front end and back end need to share code, you should create small packages that both the front end and the back end can import from. What is this in our application? In our to-do application, it's simply the one example that I could think of. This is a very simple app. I can't think of much as to what should be shared between these two, but types is usually something very common. You would need like the to-do type, which has title description, both in the server and the backend. So you could define these separately, or you could define this in a third module or package and make both of these import from it. That's the general idea. Other than this, if you yourself want to publish a package somewhere, if you want to create something like Express or Mongoose for other people to use, you should know how you can create small modules that other people can use. And that's what we're trying to understand next. Cool. Hopefully that's clear. Okay. I think the general thesis is just go a little slower, which I'm happy to. Let me also push all the code and the changes I've made until now, so you guys can just re-clone it locally rather than writing it. Okay, let me just revert all the front end changes. So no changes in the front end. Let me revert all the back end changes. No changes in the back end. The only change that I have made is I've added a new repository here, a new folder here called common. And what have I done inside common? I've defined two types. If you look at common, it simply has a single file which exports these two things. Let me also push common to the repository so you guys can pull it. Feel free to ignore what I'm doing here. So the repository now has client, it has server, it also has common. Feel free to just download it. You'll reach the same checkpoint in the code where I'm at. Cool. Let's move on. Go back to the slides. We created a new module. We called it common. That's the only thing we have done until now. Other than that, the code is exactly the same as the code here before this, which is the client is the same, the server is the same. Common just exports two new things. It exports sign up input and sign up params, which is the type of the input and the actual Zod object for the input. We still need to import it and use it in both the front end and the back end. Question is, how do front end and back end import it? The dumb way, the pre-ancient day way to do this. And even today, if you want to create a module that you want to publish to NPM that other people can locally bring using NPM install, the way to do that is using something called the npmjs.org website. So These are what are called registries. A registry basically means a place where people just put all their code that they allow other people to use. For example, you can see Express is one such repository here, React is one such repository here, Axios is one such repository here, and you can create and publish your own. Cool. That is what we're going to do now. We're going to publish this common repository, and then just like we've used Express, we will use this common repository locally and things will just work. Cool. Hopefully that is clear. To do that, first thing you have to do is go to npmjs.com and create an account. So please sign up with your email. I'm going to wait for a minute. Go to npmjs.com and create an account and sign up. What are we doing? You totally forget all the packages discussion we've done until now. We are creating our own package which exports something and we're putting it out in the world for people to use, just like Express, just like Axios. Cool. Going to wait for 1 minute. Signing up should be as simple as just going here and signing up. I've already done it. I have this username called 100xdevs. You can claim your own username. Thirty more seconds. All right. Once you've done that, come to your terminal and run npm login. Again, I've already done it. You should do it yourself. So go to your terminal and run npm login here. It'll ask you for your username, for your password, and it'll also send an OTP, also ask you for your email, and it'll send you an OTP. You should use that and then put it here. I'm going to open chat until then if someone has any questions until this point. But other people just... Why not directly use common? Great question. So you're saying why not directly use common, as in why not simply do import x from // common / src / index.js? I think the answer is, there are a few answers. One, you don't want to use relative paths throughout your app. You can get around that by doing some maths in tsconfig.json. But if you try to compile it, TypeScript will also complain that this file is outside my source folder. So I don't know what this file is, where you're importing it from. I am not going to allow importing from here. So you can, there are ways for you to do it locally as well, like which is what we'll get to with Monorepos, where you can somehow sort of add a relative path in tsconfig, add what are called references in tsconfig, and then simply use things locally, which is what we will get to eventually. But for now, we're just going to publish it. You cannot do this. If you do this, TypeScript will complain, okay, oh, this is outside my source folder, so I don't know how to compile, when to compile, I won't compile. In the chat again. Okay, tsconfig stuff. If you did not understand tsconfig stuff, then you've probably not gone through the TypeScript part. Why can't we push to our own repository? Pull it in the front end and the back end. You're saying push it to a GitHub repository? There is no easy way for you to do, I don't know, just like if we do npm install express, you can't simply do git clone express. You can't do this. It won't. npm is the standard for you to do package management in Node. Stands for Node Package Manager. There are other acronyms to it, but this is the standard for you to get external libraries. So if you want to publish, you can publish to Git, but you can't really do whatever git clone express and get it into your Node module. So you have to go through the npm route. Can we do input validation in the front end only, and if it is valid, then send to the backend calls? Great question. I think a lot of people already know the answer for this. You cannot do that because people can still go into, they can like capture requests, change the input data. They can go into Postman and still send you like erroneous data. So even if you try to do it, at some point, people can still, send you erroneous data. Front end validation is pretty much nothing. It means nothing because people can still go to Postman, use something like a proxy to change the inputs that before you're going out. You can do some things on the browser, but they're not really scalable. You can't ever trust the client. Cool. Someone said give some good issues in cal.com. I have not gone through the cal.com repo. I can quickly go through it if this class feels slow to people. I'm happy to just link one. You guys can look at it. This looks like an issue that's very well defined. I don't know if it's easy or hard, so feel free to go through this. I'm happy to look at it after the class. Cool. Alrighty. Hopefully you guys were able to log in. Next thing you have to do is give your package a name. If you've just named it common, this won't work because this needs to be unique. For example, if you go to Express, the name here will be Express. If you go to Mongoose, it will be Mongoose. If I just write common here, there is already a repository out there that exists. This is a very common name. So a good rule of thumb is to just name your repository like this, which is prefix it with your username, not mine. Please don't prefix it with 100x devs. Prefix it with @ your name, your npm name, which is, for example, whatever you see here, / any name you want. I'm naming it common. You can name it whatever you want and give it like a version number, which is we already have one here. One more thing you need to change is the main here should represent where your first entry level index.js file is, which in our case is not in the root folder as index.js. It's actually in dist/index.js. If I run tsc here, a dist folder is not created, and that is because go to tsconfig. So one more thing you have to do, go to tsconfig, add an out dir as dist. Now if you run tsc, you should see a dist folder and your main JavaScript file, not your TypeScript file. Your main JavaScript file is here in index.js, which has like your TypeScript converted into JavaScript. One very high level thing for you to know at this point is whenever you publish your packages, it's not recommended to publish your TypeScript files. You should only publish your JavaScript files because that's what other people want to use. Now this creates some problems because if you don't push your TypeScript files, they won't be able to get back your types, and we'll see how we fix that. But one general rule of thumb is when you're publishing to npm, you don't need to publish your TypeScript files. It also sort of lets you keep your code safe. For example, if this is my index. Let me remove this. If this is my index.ts file, and I don't want anyone to be able to see this well structured in your index.txt file, so I shouldn't publish it to npm. Publishing it to npm means just sending your code to npm so other people can import it. Cool. So what do we want to do? First thing I've changed here is go to tsconfig and add a out dir to dist, so that whenever you run tsc, your index.js file goes here. Second change that I've made is in package.json, replace main with dist/index.js. This is how other people that get your module, for example, when I get Express, this is how my local machine knows that this is where I need to pick the top level index.js file from. Cool. So one change I've made here, another change I've made here. What is the last thing we need to do? We just need to publish. Oh, another change I've made here is change the name. Don't have it as common, have it as @your name / common or whatever you want to name it. Finally, you have to run npm publish -- access equal to public. Now you can create private repos in npm as well. But if you try to create an npm repo, it won't let you unless you have like a paid account. So this is what we are going to do. npm publish -- access equal to public. Cool. Once I did this, it told me everything is good. Things are fine. Hopefully it happened for you as well. Just to make sure that your package is actually published to npm, what you can do is go to your browser, maybe go to your profile here, and you can see all the packages that you've published. Specifically, This is the one that I just published. As you can see, it says a few seconds ago, 100x devs / common was published. My internet seems bad. Oh, okay, there you go. And here, if you want, you can explore it. It says it has just one version, 1.0.0. And if I put a readme here, you'll see it here. Now let's try to get this locally and see what exactly I published. You can also run this command called npm pack, and that will actually show you what folders, what files you actually publish when you run the npm publish command. So what if I run npm pack in the common folder? If I open the folder now, I will see a compressed file which shows what goes to npm finally. If I uncompress this file, I can see what all I sent to npm, which includes my dist/index.js. It also includes my .ts file, which is not great because as I said, like you don't really need to or should publish your TS files. So firstly, let's change this. Let's not publish our index.ts file. Let's only publish our dist package.json and tsconfig. Cool. How to do that? Add an npm ignore file here, just like .git ignore, if a few of you have already seen this, and just write dist here. Sorry, not dist, that's the wrong thing. Write src here because you don't want to send src to npm. So you can just write in .npm ignore src and it will ignore the source folder and just send everything else. Now try to run npm pack and try to see what you get. Now you just get dist. You got this package thingy because I did not delete, and this tar.gz because I did not delete them. But you don't send source anymore, which is good because you don't want to send your TypeScript files to npm. Cool. Going back, move to bin, just deleting a few folders, and then try running npm publish again. You might see an error. The error says you cannot publish over the previously published version. So all you have to do is just change the version that you're publishing. This is how versioning happens in packages as well. When you install Express, you can get like if I go to server/package.json, here you will see I mentioned ke Zod ka I need this version. Like this tilde means something, but if you ignore this tilde for now, give me this version of Zod. And the Zod developers, as they keep on sort of improving Zod, add more dependencies and publish, you can just change the version here and get like a better version, a newer version. Cool. That is the same thing we're doing for our own package. Cool. npm publish again. Once you do, it says a new version of the 100x devs/common was created. Go to the browser, refresh here, and you will see 2 versions in a while. There you go. 1.0.0, 1.0.1. Now that I have published it, anyone can use it. You guys can frankly use it in your projects as well. If you guys try running npm install at 100x devs/common in your repository, it will still work. But I would urge you to create your own and then try to bring it locally on your own machine. Cool. So let's go to, now let's try to actually integrate it with our application. So let's go to client. And here, let's try to run npm install at 100x devs/common. You should do your own thing. Okay. Cool. Seems like it installed. Let's go to server. Let's do the same thing. Server will use one of the types that it is exporting. Client will use the other one. We install at 100x devs/common in both of them. Let's try to see what happens here. If I go to the node modules folder, I now have at 100x devs/common as a dependency. If I do an ls here, I can see tsconfig package.json and dist, which is what we expected. We did not publish the ts file. We have simply published the index.js file. Cool. Everything is fine until now. This will create problems with TypeScript, but we'll come to that very soon. Okay. I'm in the server folder and I've already run npm install at 100x devs/common. Let's try to import it. So we'll go to the server folder here. I will go to the routes here. I will go to auth.ts And here I will try to now import, just like from express I can import app, from add 100x dev / common I can import what is the property called? It's called sign up input. But it gives me an error. Does anyone know why this error comes? This should have ideally just worked. I have defined this in a different file. I am just importing it here. I should have just been able to do like this dot safe verify or whatever, that safe parse. But it is giving me an error. If I hover over it, it says, it says kids declared and never used. That you can ignore. That's because it just simply thinks like it's not used. Let's just call it here. Now let's hover over this red error. It says could not find a declaration file for module this. It also gives you something like this, which we have seen in the past for Express. In the past, we've seen it ask us to do npm install save dev at type / express. So does anyone know what the error is here and maybe even how to fix it? Should we ignore tsconfig? We are installing the folder, so it takes both spaces, but I guess helpful when you, okay. Does anyone? Good. That's fine. So look at it from a very high level. This thing that I published to npm only has .js files. If it only has .js files, how will TypeScript know the types of sign up input or anything that this guy is exporting? We have never really published the types. Why haven't we published it? Because I said it's not a good idea to publish TypeScript to your server, to npm. It actually gives you a very nice hint. It says could not find a declaration file for module this thing. Question is, what is a declaration file and how can we publish it? So let's try to understand that next. If I go back to my common folder and if I go to source/index.es, here when I run tsc, a dist folder is created which has just an index.js file. Have you guys heard of .d.ts files multiple places? Have you seen a .d.ts file in the past? Yes, no, yes. Some people have yes, some people have no. So there is a third type of file other than the .ts file and the .js file that is very useful in use cases like these. This file is called the declaration file, and the way it sort of ends with, the extension that it ends with is .d.ts. How does it work? If I actually, let's try to go to server/auth.ts and let's try to hover over this express and maybe even click over it. JWT. Let's go to this JWT, go to the top of auth.ts, hover over this JWT, press command or control and then click on it. The file that it took me to ends with .d.ts. And if you look at it, where does it come from? It comes from server/node/module/at types/json web token /index.d.ts. So what is this d.ts file? This is called the declaration file and it has a lot of ugly code which gives you just the types of your code, not the actual JavaScript code, neither the complete TypeScript file which has both JavaScript and TypeScript. It gives you just the TypeScript. So if I run tsc, we know that tsc converts a TypeScript file to a JavaScript file and removes all the interfaces, all the types and all that jazz. What if I want just the interfaces, the types and not the actual execution code? For that, you define this d.ts file which contains just your types and not your actual JavaScript runtime code. Cool. All right. So let's try to see how you create this file. The answer is fairly simple. Just go to your tsconfig.json and write declaration true here. That's all you have to do. So what did I do? I included a new key here called declaration : true. If I save this file, if I go to common and run tsc now, you will see dist has two files, index.js and index.d.ts. Let's try to explore index.d.ts. It just has two types. It has no runtime logic. For example, if I add a function here, a console.log to index.ts, maybe a console.log appears. Most probably that won't either. hi there. Let's say I add a console.log hi there to index.ts and I run tsc. If I go to dist/index.d.ts, you don't see the console.log here because it does not have any JavaScript logic. All the JavaScript logic is here. This guy does have the console.log, and all the TypeScript types, just the types, are here. Why is this useful? Because if someone wants to get your your module as a dependency, they can figure out the types from here. We just saw this in JSON Web Tokens as well. If I go to auth.ts, if I hover over this and then press enter, it takes me to a index.d.ts file, which means this is the file where TypeScript gets its types from specifically for external modules. Cool. We have created this. Last thing that's left to do is npm publish. If you do that, it should give you an error. If you go to package.json, just change the version to, let's say, 1.0.2 and run npm publish. Now the file that goes to npm contains your .js file. It also contains your .d.ts file. Cool. Let me go to server. Now we need to get the new version from npm. Let me just do a pause here and let you guys publish. So I'll take like a 1 minute break and also open chat for people who are confused. For the people who are not confused, just publish this to npm. Cool. Someone said, if the JS and TS file are available, can't someone just reverse engineer your code? Yes, they can, just with the JS file as well. That is if you have given out your code to npm, you are okay with other people using it. In fact, you want other people to use it. So they will find your code, and that's fine. You don't worry about it. Not able to log in or start pushing again, I'll do that. If someone is not able to log in to npm, you have to sign up. Maybe hopefully that fixes it. Just try to sign up to npm. If one email doesn't work, maybe use a different email, and that probably should be simple. Okay, that's answered. Are there any alternatives than pushing to npm? Yeah, that's what Monorepos let you do. You don't do this on a day-to-day basis. Okay, let me make a change in common, then publish it, and then pull it in the other files, and then you don't do that. You just use something called Monorepos or workspaces, and that's what we'll understand next. Cool. Alrighty. Hopefully some of you are able to publish it. Let's go to let's go to server. Let's go to package.json and just change this from 1.0.1 to 1.0.2. Else it'll just keep bringing 1.0.1 for you. Now in your server folder, just delete node modules, run npm install again. Now if you go to node modules at 100x devs/common, and if you look at package.json, you will see it has version 1.0.2, which also means if you go to dist, you will see index.d.ts. Now if you go to the file that was complaining, which was auth.ts, you will see it has stopped complaining. If I hover over it and click over it, it takes me to the d.ts file that we created for our project. So that's how you publish a TypeScript project to npm. Why is it useful? One use case is this, which is like an ugly use case because no one does it these days. But other than that, if you ever want to create a module, a CLI, an HTTP server of your own, a middleware of your own, and publish it, this is the way to do it. Let's quickly see if this works. Sign up input from 100x devs/common. Sign up input dot safe parse rec.body. If not success, return message error. Alrighty, else you do what you're doing, which is parse name, parse input dot data dot username, cool. So what have we done from the starting of the class until now? Only thing we've actually achieved is moving this sign up input from our own module to a separate module that we've published to npm. Let's try to see if this works, and if it works, the same thing will just work for the front end as well. Cool. We're at I'm just going to run the backend code. And if I go to, as you can see, we see the hi there that our original library had, which means it's getting imported correctly. If I go to Postman send the wrong input, it says message error 403 forbidden, which is what I'm returning here. Cool. I'm just going to publish this for people who want to try this out locally. The good thing is we don't have to worry too much about this. We will eventually just move to Monorepos and they handle all of this sort of pain for us, and we don't actually have to publish to npm every time. We just do these things locally. All right, cd dot dot git add server. Let me just add everything. Cool. We're at the 1 hour mark. I feel a few people might have been overwhelmed by this, so let me do a poll. Was this part clear of how you can publish to npm and use it? Alrighty. 75% are good and 25% are not good, which means we will have to pause and we'll have to recap and do a bunch of other things. 75% take a break, at least 15 minutes I would say. 25% chat is open, tell me what's up. What if we want to use a private npm package in our app? When you're installing, you will have to first, npm has organizations, you will get you will need to have, so if you're getting payment required, just make sure you're publishing a public repo, which means run this. That's probably the issue. What after publish, I'll recap. What if you want to use any private npm package in our app? Yeah, so if you want to use a private npm package in your app, you will have to sign up using npm. When you do an npm install, it will check whether or not you're part of that organization, and only if you're part of that organization will that code come to you. Is there any easy way to navigate the actual implementation of the function instead of going to .d.ts when you do a control click? That is a great question. Is there an easy way for me to just go to the actual implementation? The point is we don't ever publish actual implementation, right? I have never published the actual implementation of this code. So there is no way for you to go to the actual implementation unless the end user actually publishes the TS files that sort of contain the actual implementation. If they publish the .ts files, I think you can directly go there. I could be wrong on this. Do we need to care about node modules folder when publishing to npm? Npm will automatically ignore the node modules folder. So if you do an npm, if you go to the common folder and do npm pack, if you open this and you try to see what was packed here, it does not have your node modules. So you don't have to worry about node modules or add it to npm ignore. It automatically ignores it. Opening the chat again. What is d.ts again? Okay, sounds good, sounds good. All right, let me just show my .npm ignore file. It just has one file here called src, so that I don't publish my TypeScript code to npm. Cool. A few people asked, what is the .d.ts file? Let me just go from the top and recap everything. Forget about this specific application or the fact that we were trying to put some code in some common that both client and server are using. Let's say you are an application developer and you want to publish your own app or like module to npm. You want other people to be like, okay, npm install at, let's say your name is Raman / my module. Question is, how do you do it? The answer is, first you create a folder, let's say common. In our case, you could name it anything. You initialize a package.json here. If you look at the package.json, the few things that are new here is, number one, name is at your npm name on npm repos on like npmjs.org / whatever name you want to give. You don't have to do this. You then have to just make sure you give a very unique name. So because most names are already taken on npm, so you can't just be like, I don't know, Elon Musk here, because Elon Musk is already taken. Someone must have published an Elon Musk library. So generally a good idea is to just proceed it with your username, because anything, even if I do of 100x dev / Elon Musk, I know it is available because no one has. I have like a prefix before. Cool. This is one thing that's different. Version, you just keep increasing them as you publish. The other thing that's different is the main file. This is by default index.js. You have to make it dist/index.js, which is where you finally create your JavaScript files. If you don't create it in this folder, if you create it in a different folder, if you don't call it dist, you have to make sure you make that change here. So whatever is appearing here should be the same thing that's appearing here in the out_dir section of your tsconfig. That is all the changes we made to package.json. So you could create your own package, and the only changes you'll have to make is change this and change this. Cool. Next up, if you go to tsconfig.json, you will see I've made one more change, which is root dir I have set as source. Why? The main goal was so that the TypeScript files are all contained in this src folder, and I can just npm ignore this folder, so I'm not pushing all the source files. If I did not do it, all the files would be here in the common, and I would have had to add like index.ts, and if I had other files here, let's say common.ts or auth.ts, if I had a bunch of files, I would have had to write all of those files here, just so that I don't have to do it and I can simply write source. I moved all my logic here. Generally also this is a good idea, good thing to do. Cool. We have source, which has index.ts, which has all this logic. We have a package.json where I made a few changes. We have a tsconfig.json, which has just these two things that are extra. The last thing that we introduced is this declaration : true, which basically is, if you don't pass this, your dist folder simply contains index.js. If you do pass this, your dist folder contains two things, index.d.ts and index.js. The question is, what exactly is index.d.ts, Harkirat? So when you have, let's go to, what is the goal of TypeScript, or more specifically TSC, the TypeScript compiler? If this is a .ts file, the goal of the TypeScript compiler, TSC, when I run the TSC command, its goal is to remove all the interfaces types, do the compilation checks, make sure all the types are right, and then finally create a .js file. If you have two .ts files, then its goal is to create two .js files. That is what TSC does. What does it do? It removes all the TypeScript interfaces, all type definitions it removes, and finally converts it to JS file as long as your compilation is right. There is an exact opposite of this .js file, which is the .d.ts file, which does not contain any JavaScript logic, which means any console.log. If you've written a function which has, let's say, does sum, it will not have that sum function. It will just have the type definitions of the sum function. And how do you create this file? You just set declaration to true in your tsconfig. What did I do? So let's try to look at what .d.ts file this file looks as we write more logic, okay? And let's try to understand the difference between these two files. Later we'll understand why we need it. If I go to my index.ts file in common, and let's say I define a new function here called isOdd, which takes a number as an input, and if nummod2 equal to 0, returns true, else it returns false. So what does this function do? The isOdd function takes a number as an input. If nummod2 is 0, which means the remainder of num with 2 is 0. What does that mean? It's either 2 or 4 or 6 or something like that, which means this function should return a true, else it should return a false. Let's define another function here. Let's call it the thing that we did yesterday, which is first L, which takes an array as input, which is a string array, and simply returns array of 0. If you might remember from yesterday, you can give it types if need be. For example, I can write :string here, or you can not give it. It can automatically infer here that it will be a boolean. If you want to write, you can actually write it. Let's try to run TSC now, and let's look at the JavaScript file and the .d.ts file. If I go to dist, what does the JavaScript file look like? It has a bunch of some new syntax because we have used common JS here as the syntax in package.json. So it does not in tsconfig.json. We have used ES 2016. Oh no, so we have used common JS as the syntax to export, which is why I don't, and this we have discussed in the first TypeScript class. Since I've used common JS here, I see a bunch of exports dot first L, some random mumbo jumbo versus simply something like export first L equal to whatever. But this is your JavaScript file. It has the complete implementations of your isOrd function and your first L function. The .d.ts file simply says, bro, isOrd is a function. It returns a boolean. Input type is number. Input type is string array. Output type is string. Does not contain the actual implementation of it. Why? Because when we finally publish this to npm, the person who is importing it, for example, in auth.ts we imported sign up input. It is good enough for them to know the types. This has a safe parse function. They don't necessarily need to know the implementation. That implementation is in the JavaScript file. But the TypeScript compiler is smart enough, or more specifically in this case, your IDE is smart enough to know, okay, bro, the types of this thing is present in the .d.ts file. So if someone calls safe parse 2, I will complain because I found in the .d.ts file that this is not a right function name. However, I know that .safeparse is the right function name. Again, if I go here, hover over it and click over it, I simply reach the the type definition. I do not reach the JavaScript implementation, which is fine. TypeScript compiler only needs to check the types to know where and where not to show these red squigglies. So that's why the .d.ts file is used, which is slightly different from the not slightly different, like very different from the TS file. But basically what you can think of is that the TS file is a combination, not exactly true, but like the TS file is the combination of this and this. Using both of these things, you can basically create the .ts file because you have the implementation here, you have the types defined here. Cool. Hopefully that was clear. Let's do a poll again. Alrighty, still at 90%, but pretty good. Cool. I think that's a good checkpoint. Let's move on. Let's understand Monorepos, and then I can take more. I'll quickly go through Monorepos, how to set up a simple Next.js React Monorepo locally, and then I'll leave you guys to it. The assignment of this week is going to be moving the course selling application from a simple repository with bunch of folders to a Monorepo, and then I can take more doubts for the people who are still stuck. Cool. Let's publish just the JS. We did this, publish, never mind. You guys should try to complete the to-do application as well locally, which means if you go here to VS Code, you should go to server/routes/auth.ts and like add the other input validations, same for to-do.ts, so on and so forth. I will leave that as an assignment because if we do it right now, it will just take up the rest of the class. Done this, let's move on to Monorepos. Cool. So one thing we've learned until now is how to structure your project so that modules can use other modules. Why is this useful? Because we just created a function that you saw I imported in auth.ts, the sign up input. And if I go to the React part, which is the client here, I can also import it in to-do list.ts. What? I can simply import the other type, which was, what was it? If I go to source assets, I think it was to-do type. Let's see. Common source index.ts. I was exporting sign up params. So I can simply import sign up params here, and in the fetch, oh sorry, it will not be in this function, it will actually be in signup.ts, but you guys get the idea, I think. I can also import this from at 100xdev/common. And why is this cool? Because I can simply use it here. Let sign up params equal to, and it will give me the right sort of type checking here. If I try to add something random here, it will complain. I have to bring the latest version to the React part. So if I look at the React package.json, it still gets the old version of 100xdev/common. I should update this, and I guess you guys get the idea. Remove node modules, npm install, and you should get the right types. Specifically, you should get the sign up params here. Maybe it's 2. Right, sign up params now comes back as a type. I can just use it here and it gives me a red squiggly if I try to give it something extra. Why is this useful? Because now I can simply send this, and when I'm sending this, I, as the front-end developer, already know that the type comes from here. If in the future sign up params gets a first name, last name, this will start complaining here, and I can simply fix it here versus looking at the backend logic. Cool. That is the high level use of modules. But this was very hard. This was very hard to create a new module, publish it to some npm, and let the other guys pull it. So another way to this, the TypeScript people, npm people sort of figured this out, and then they introduced something called npm workspaces or yarn workspaces, which let you do something similar. But when you're in one folder, for example, if I'm in server/routes/todo.ts or specifically auth.ts, rather than getting this from npm, I can simply get it from a folder over here in common. Okay. Similarly, in the client, if I'm putting something, I can get it simply locally, and I can still use this syntax, yarn workspaces, and a bunch of open source repositories that let you do a little more than just what npm or yarn lets you do, which are like Learna is one and Turborepo is one, which are open source monorepo handling libraries that let you do all of this logic without having to publish everything to npm, just having all the code locally and yet being able to use syntax that looks something like this. Question is, how do they do it? Let's try to figure it out. So the most popular one is called Turborepo. If you look at cal.com, that's what they use. Even if you look at Backpack, this is the sort of popular choice when it comes to a monorepo framework. So if you go to cal.com and search for Turbo, you will see a turbo.json. This is the monorepo framework that they have used. So let's try to understand what Turbo is. So for that, please go to this website called turbo.build. It is one of many frameworks. If you read over it, it says high performance build system for JavaScript and TypeScript code bases. So it's actually much more than a simple sort of monorepo handling framework. It lets you do a bunch of things. Let's look at what those are. Get started. So what is Turborepo? It is an intelligent build system optimized for JavaScript and TypeScript code bases. What is a build system? The process of converting TypeScript to JavaScript. The process of converting your React code into JavaScript is all called building your TypeScript code or your JavaScript code or your React code. Turborepo is one of many frameworks that let you do this. So it can help you convert React to the final JavaScript. It can help you convert TypeScript to JavaScript. It can also help you create like a monorepo. Cool. It says there are 3 ways to do it. Add it to an existing monorepo, add it to an existing project, create a new monorepo. For now, let's just create a new monorepo and try to create a simple to-do application with all the constructs that it gives you. Create a new monorepo. This is the method it asks you to use. Okay. npx create turbo at latest. This is similar to the wait command we have used until now. Let's try to run this locally. I would urge you guys to run it locally as well. If you don't have npx, just run npm i-g npx. I think that should do it. npm i-g npx. No, that won't do it. How to install npx? If you don't have npx as a command locally, then just let's Google how to install it. Is there anyone who doesn't have npx as a command locally? Let me open chat, or everyone is good. If yes, then I can just go through the, I think it just comes by default. I could be wrong. Do you have npx locally? Yes or no? Alrighty, it's not great. Only 75% have it. So let's try to understand how you can install npx. Install on, I'm assuming most of you guys are on Ubuntu or Linux or some version of Linux. Let me just Google how to do it on Mac. npx command not found. npm i-g npx. Try it. For me, it gives out an error because it already exists. For you, it should just run. For the people who don't have it, please run npm i-g npx, and hopefully it should install it locally. Globally. Going to do a repoll after this in like 15 seconds. Alrighty, good to go. 93% have it, 7% still don't have it. You're either on Windows, I'm assuming, or some errors. Just try to follow along. Later on, after the class, ask a TA to help you install npx, and then you can go from there. Cool. So I'm in my 100x devs folder. You guys can be in your whatever root folder you want the project installed in, and then simply run npx create turbo at latest. Where would you like to create your turbo repo? For me, it will be, I don't know, week 8-2- second class. You can name it whatever you want. What package manager do you want to use? I will use yarn. You can use npm. It will still work the same. To wait for it to install. Wow, it's taking like a really long time for me. So as you can see, it created a few folders for me: apps/web, apps/docs, and then packages/some ESLint, which I'll come to what it is, packages/tsconfig, and packages/UI. So this is like a general structure of this is a Next.js application which Turbo gives you by default. Next is very similar to React, so don't yet get overwhelmed. You can actually introduce React here as well. In fact, if you go to Turbo repo, they give you a bunch of example repositories for Next.js. This is another front-end framework. Design system will probably let you create something like, never mind, don't worry about this. React Native, if you want to use that. Kitchen Sink has front-end code, back-end code, everything. If you look at this guy right here, this doesn't have any backend code yet. We will introduce backend code here, but this by default is just a pure front-end monorepo, which has a bunch of things that most front-end projects have. Most front-end projects have a bunch of TS configs. We've tried this multiple times. We have a TS config for our React code, for our server code. So they created a separate package where you have all your TS configs for both server, front-end, backend, because the whole point of Turbo repo or any such library is to allow one file to import from one module to import from another module. So web can simply point to a TS config here. That is the point of this module. Packages/UI contains all your React components. So if you remember, we have created the to-do application, and in that to-do application, we put all our components in the components folder. If I open it in VS Code, you will see client/src/components has all my login, sign up, and to-do list component. They sort of, this is general practice to contain all these high-level components in packages.ui. Why? Because you could have multiple applications. For example, for our course selling application, you could have the end user app, which has a sign up page, and the admin app, which has the sign up page. Just to make sure both of them can reuse the same sign up page, you can put all your, or you should put all your components here. TS configuration, this is done. Yes, this you can ignore for now. This I'll probably create an offline video. This just lets you do lint. This is the configuration for linting your project, which basically means how many tab spaces you should have, where you should have comma, whether you should have semicolon or not. All these things we'll create an offline video where I'll explain ESLint and prettier in more depth. Finally, your apps folder contains what you should what you show to the end user. For example, the cal.com website, finally, this full website, this Next.js app is stored in cal.com/apps/web. This is the final website code. This internally uses a bunch of modules. For example, packages slash, this also has UI, and UI has all of their components. For us, we have a to-do application, so we will try to put all our to-do application components in our UI folder. So this is general practice to, or like general high-level structure of a monorepo. There are of course more specific things, for example, the backend and so on and so forth, which we will add. But for now, let's try to just move our front end here and let's try to reap the benefits of a to-do application. Cool. Let's go to Visual Studio Code and let's open this. I would urge you guys to open it on your side as well. All right, I see a bunch of apps, packages, bunch of things. The first thing you need to do is open terminal. Whenever you see it, for me it takes some time. I'm going to wait. For you guys, just open the terminal and run either npm install or yarn install, whatever package manager you are using. I used yarn, so I'm going to run yarn install. If you used npm, you should you run npm install, else you should run yarn install. Wow, it's really taking time. Okay, I'm going to open another terminal here. And in this terminal, I'm going to open this and run npm install, yarn install. Okay, it already has everything installed for me. Might have installed for you as well. Next, let's look at the top level apps. More specifically, let's look at the web app. Let's go here and let's run yarn dev. You will see it says Next Dev. So this is not a React application. This is actually a Next.js application, which is very, very close to React. Only it does a bunch of things that React doesn't do. We will cover this very soon, most probably next week. So for now, you can either let it be a Next.js app, or you can introduce a React app right next to it here using Wait, like we've done until now. I'm going to just stick to Next.js. I would suggest you do as well. It is very similar to a React app. It under the hood, it's very different, but like from the very top, if you look at the web folder, if you look at apps, web folder, then look at app, page layout, there should be a page.ts. Okay, so this page.tsx, let's look at and let's see what the final thing comes on localhost :3000. I see web here. I see a boop button here. Okay. If you look at page.tsx, you see header, title equal to web, and a button here. Where does button and header come from? They come from the UI. So in any Turbo Repo app or general monorepos, you write all of your components in UI. You use them here in various apps that you have. You might ask why. As I said, if you have a sign up component and sign in component defined in UI here, you can import it in both the admin app of your website and the user facing app of your website. So maybe let's try to quickly build that. Let's create a sign up, sign in page in UI, and let's try to create two apps, not one. One app for your admins, another app for your end users, and let's try to just work on UI today for the next 20 minutes, and then I'll take doubts so that we just understand how you can import, export between modules, and then next week we will introduce back into this and go from there. Cool. Are all of you able to run this locally and see something here just like I do? All right, not everyone is. Cool. Going to take a pause then. What do you guys see? The people who are not seeing are not able to run this code locally, I'm assuming. I'm going to open the chat. For everyone else, feel free to just, it's very simple. Create your components here, try to import it in the Next.js app, and try to just import a simple sign up page here. I'm going to open the chat for everyone else. What is turbo repo? Okay, good question. npm run dev how command to run. Okay, sounds good. Command to run is if you go to your terminal, this is the top level folder, go to apps, go to web and run npm run dev. That's the command that you have to run. You can also go back to folders and first run yarn build to make sure all your individual modules build. If you run yarn build at the very top, you will see it builds doc, it builds web, which are your apps. It should also probably build your individual packages. But the command that you actually have to run is yarn dev in your Next.js folder. So cd app/web yarn dev or npm run dev, whatever you're using. And you should be able to open localhost :3000 and see a web header and a button. Opening the chat again. Can everyone see this? You can also directly run npm run dev here and it will start both your docs and your web. You will see on localhost :3001 your docs, and you will see on localhost :3000 your web app. How to start turbo repo? Okay, I think you mean what is the command, the first command to run. It is npx create-turbo at latest. This is the command that you have to run for you to get all the files locally, and then simply either run npm run dev at the very top of the folder, and this will start both your apps. We have two apps right now, a dev app, a docs app and a web app. If you want to run just one, just go to the folder and run npm run dev. For a few people, it is still installing. Okay, what is the use of the command npm dev yarn dev? What does it do? So if you want to look at what npm run dev or npm dev does, just go to the specific module. For example, if I go to apps/docs and if I open package.json, it will actually show you what dev does, which in this case, it runs a Next.js application by using next dev --port 3001. Similarly, if you look at our VS Code, our original to-do application, which is this app right here, you can just go to package.json and see what npm run dev runs. Which in this case it runs Vite, which bundles your project. Stream is lagging for me. Can everyone see me well? Can everyone hear me well? Or is my internet bad? Alright, it's good. Cool. Going to pause the chat. It is lagging for, I think, hopefully just one person. I'm going to finish really quickly the app and then I'll take more questions. And as I said, the assignment for this week is either in React or in Next framework of your choice. We will learn Next.js next week. So you can skip it if you want. You can just initialize a new React project here and create the front end and back end for either a course selling app or an e-commerce app. The reason I want to specify a course selling app is because it has two sides, an admin side and a user side, which lets you create two apps and not just one. You can also create an e-commerce app which has something similar, an admin side and a client side. Cool. Let me quickly show how I would do it and then you guys can try it locally. And if you create a React folder here which contains like React and uses Vite to bundle everything, make sure in package.json you will notice something peculiar here. UI points to star, and this is how monorepos get other modules which are in the same sort of repository. This repository has packages/UI, and this UI, if you look at package.json, has the name UI. If you want this UI not from npm but from your local submodule, and if you create a new React app here, if you go to package.json, you have to add UI:* for you to be able to use it in various pages of yours. So if you look at here, only way you can import from UI is if you have UI star present in package.json. So make sure you do that. Cool. All right. Quickly going to show you how I would build a sign up page and then use it in both docs and web. And then I'm going to take more doubts. I'll just go to UI. This is our module that both apps, web and docs can use. And here I will create a new file called signup.tsx. Now maybe I want it to be a little pretty. For that, I will go to packages/UI and maybe install MUI. So if I go here, I'll simply copy this and paste this here. So I can bring MUI locally to the packages folder. So to UI. One small thing to notice here is I haven't brought MUI as a dependency to web or docs. I have brought it as a dependency to UI. Web and docs use UI, so they will transitively get that as a dependency because I will import a component here and this component will use MUI internally, but you don't have to install them in these individual modules. Just UI is enough, even though I see an error here. Yeah, I found React. Ooh, the version of React is different. Let's see if just MUI comes. No, it does not. I think let's try to style it with some handwritten CSS. And I think the issue here is there is a dependency issue which says cannot resolve UI at 00, found React 17.0.2, but MUI React 18.2.2 from React DOM. Let's try to style it without MUI and then I'll try to fix this, and in the offline video, the final solution, I'll try to fix this and try to use it. In button.jsx, okay, it uses no styling library. So I'll have to do some manual styling here, which is fine. So let's go to signup.tsx. Let's export const signup, which returns a div, and let's give it some style. I'm trying to basically create a card. And then 2 input boxes. Email and finally password. If you guys want, you can code it on your side as well. Let me just finish this and we'll try to bring in MUI if needed, or I'll just take questions. All right, I've created a sign up component in UI. I haven't yet exported it. I do export it from signup.tsx, but whenever you're creating a new component here, you should export it from the top level index.tsx file, which you can do like this. And once I do this, I can simply go to web app, and then maybe in this page, I'm going to just replace it with sign up. And where does sign up come from? From UI. No type errors. So I think this will just work. Let's try to run yarn dev in the web folder, if that is where I made this change. It's running it on localhost /3000. When I go here, I see my very nice sign up card, which is not very pretty right now. But why is this cool? This is cool because I have another Next.js application right next to it called docs. And here as well, if I go to page.tsx, I can use the same sign up component and basically reuse sign up across multiple front ends, which could be the admin website, the user website, so on and so forth. Cool. Going to take a pause now. Going to take a questions next. If you're able to do the questions until 9, fine. If not, then we'll, if you're not able to, if questions end early, then I'll try to fix why MUI wasn't working here. High level, quick summarization of what we've learned today. One, you can publish modules to npm, but if you want to specifically understand monorepos, you don't have to. There are frameworks like Lerna, and the one that we used is Turborepo, that let you write code in a modular fashion, where here I wrote a sign up component in my UI submodule, and this code can be reused by multiple front-end applications. In fact, I could have a React native app here, which could also use it. It won't be able to use exactly my sign up page because this has things that React Native doesn't understand. But if I had random functions here, for example, the isEven function, if I had a new package here called types, which had my Zod types, I could simply import it in my website, in my React Native app, in my other applications. All end user apps can just reuse all these packages here. And this is how it happens in the real world as well in cal.com, other website, other MERN stack applications. Cool. Quick pause, just making sure how we are doing. Let's do a quick poll of this high level understanding of monorepos and how to push packages to npm. All right, 80%. End poll. So for the 20%, the 80% who understand everything, can you figure out why MUI is not working for me? And is it not working for you either? Most probably it's some React version that's wrong. So, I mean, I can give you a hint. Most probably it's this only. Frankly, I can probably just fix it right here. Try to figure it out. I think it might be some dependency issue here. For everyone else, the 20% who didn't understand everything, can you tell me specifically which part was all right? To pause, I don't understand what Turborepo is. So Turborepo, if you look at its official definition, let's go to Chrome here. Turborepo is a build system that makes ship happen. Too much jargon. What we need to understand it, one, it helps you write small submodules and share code between them. Two, it actually also does bundling under the hood. And if you have an application that has Next, React, front-end, back-end, a bunch of other things, and you want to put all of them in the same repo, this lets you do it. This does a bunch of other things, which is why Lerna probably is a better example to show. What is Lerna? The original tool for JavaScript monorepos. It's a fast, modern build system for managing and publishing multiple TypeScript packages from the same repo. So both this thing, Lerna and Turbo does a bunch of other things, but Lerna specifically, or what I wanted to teach today, was how you can create multiple code segments, which could be front end, back end, or code that needs to be shared between them. How you can use them in the same high level repository. Why? Because before this was introduced, people used to have a different repository on GitHub for backend, different repository on GitHub for frontend. That came out to be not the best idea. People realized you should shove all your code in the same repository. If you do that, you can't really share code between repositories unless you publish one to npm and then get it from there, which is like a tedious task. Then came this concept of yarn workspaces that let you. So if you look at package.json here, you will see something called workspaces, which tells you what all folders, high level folders, contains your submodules. So this sort of defined that, okay, you can have a single high level repository, a single high level package.json, which describes, okay, all my modules are either in apps or my modules are in packages. So what is Lerna or Turbo? These are frameworks that let you, this actually you can do without these frameworks as well. But they'll do a bunch of other things. For example, hot module reloading. If I make a change here in UI, the sign up page, rather than I change it from submit to submit one and save it automatically, even though it exists here in the UI folder. Let me just run yarn dev here. Let me go to localhost 3000. What do I see here? Submit one. If I make this change to submit to, I see submit to here. This process of, even though UI exists as a separate module, I did not have to publish it, republish it, get it back and put it here. The whole process of rebundling it was taken care by Turborepo in this case. Cool. So that's the one of many things it does. Cool. Someone showed me some code to get MUI. So let me try that. Before I do that, let me just again open chat. What about backend? So exactly, good question. Usually backend is also another module here in your top level apps, because backend is also considered like a high level, top level thing that you need to have, and it's not part of packages. If you go to cal.com, you will see it has 4 apps, not 2. It has the web, which is the Next.js app. It has Swagger, which don't worry about what it is. It has API, which is your, I'm assuming, backend API. Let's see. Commercial cal.com public API. It's like the public backend API, which exposes the CRUD endpoints for most of our important resources. So if you want to introduce backend, you just add a new folder here. You do npm install express. If you want to independently work, you don't need any other module. Then you just work like you used to. But if your API needs to use something from a different module here, in your package.json here, you simply add something similar to this guy right here. And then once you do it, you'll be able to use it here. So in our to-do application, what you should do is in your packages, introduce a new common folder. Common folder should have the Zod types, export them, and then import them here in your web and in your API. Cool. Good question. And we just create a new file, including the code, back and forth. Then why do we have to use Turbo to do this? Someone asks, we just create a new file, include it in the code that's needed by both frontend and backend, and import that file. Why do we have to use Turbo Repo to do this? Someone asks, why can I not just create a new file called, I don't know, let's go back to our original project, the week 8 project. I'm assuming your question is, okay, why can I not, there is client, there is server, they both need to use the same file. Why can I not simply do this? Zod types.ts, define it here and then import it in both client and in server. The problem is, if I define a file here in Zod types.ts, export, firstly, I cannot use import z from Zod. If I try to do this, it will complain. The top level folder actually doesn't contain any package.json. You might say, okay, I'll just create a new folder and put everything there. Effectively, we have done that only. In common, we have created a new folder, added a package.json, added Zod as a type here. The only question you might ask is, okay, why not do, I think what you're trying to ask is, why not do this? Import Zod type from common source index. Why not do this? I mean, as you can see, it almost is working also. Why not simply do this? I think is your question. You can do it, but does it compile? It might just compile. I don't know. I think it will complain. No, it doesn't complain. Save. So you can do this apparently. I would have expected this to throw an error. For example, maybe let's try this in the server. I mean, if this works in the server as well, then sure, you can do it. Routes auth.ts Zod. cd server npm run start. I mean, this might just work. No, it doesn't work. What does it say? Oh, sign up identifier. It might just work, it seems. Oh, it does work. So yeah, you can probably do that as well. The problem, I guess, is, if I have to really answer this from first principles, is ke haan, theek hai, here you import from // common. In a different file, it will be something like this. It just looks ugly. But, and the other thing might be ke this file might contain, and this is probably not a good argument. This is probably the only argument I have, that okay, this looks much uglier than this. And secondly, it might happen that this is actually a module that's published somewhere. You really want that this common is exposed to the end users on npm, which is why having this here, okay, this is probably a good argument. Having this versus this, Why is this good and why is this bad is your question. I would have assumed this doesn't work only because TypeScript complains, but it doesn't complain. TypeScript, it just works for some reason. Now that it works, the question is, why is this better than this? And I have a few arguments from first principles. I'm sure there is a proper interview answer for this. My first principles answer is, if this thing is actually a module that your end users need to use, which means you want to publish common for everyone in the world. It's like an Express-like library. Then doing this is better than this, because if you're using Lerna, you will get this code locally. If you deploy this somewhere on the internet on AWS, it can get the latest version from NPM and not use your local dependency. That's one argument I can give. But good question. I'll probably think of a better answer for this. But it seems like, yeah, this could also just work. Why even need Monorepos? Why even use Turbo when you can simply do this? Good question. I don't know. Moving on. Any more questions? Turbo looks similar to React. In React, we make components, assemble them, and into the main component, and React organizes the front end. That is right, but like they're actually pretty different. So in React, you don't have to put everything in different components. You can actually put everything in the same file. In React, if I go to client here, I go to app.jsx, I can define all my components here only. I could write function, sign up, and then return whatever, div/div. So you don't, that's not a property of React. That's just us being smart and, you know, defining things in different files. Similar to our backend. If I go to our backend code, it's me who has sort of structured this into various files. It's not really Node.js that inspects, like asks us to do it. So not exactly the same thing. Turbo repo is meant for you to allow modules and allow one module to import other module. React specifically, I wouldn't say it's the same purpose. Cool. Client, server, backend will all be in the apps folder. Yes. The end user application, which is your front end for the user, for the admin, and the backend will all be in the apps folder. So first we have to do this monorepo thingy before we start every project. Yeah, exactly. If you're just building a React application, then don't worry about it. But if you're building a full stack application, good idea to do this monorepo thingy before you start building your backends and frontends. Going to pause the chat here. If monorepo has backend and frontend both, if repo is displayed as a whole and something is in backend like timeout or whatever, wouldn't that whole application fail? Doesn't it defy the microservices of having separation between services? Good question. The question is, if you have a single repository which has your backend code also, front-end code also, wouldn't that create problems? Which was it? Probably this one. Yeah. In your final compilation, wouldn't, if we try to run the backend code, it will just stop working because the front-end code has window objects? And the answer is no, that doesn't happen because you import the right set of things. Of course, in API, if you try to import a React file from UI, it will break, it will complain, it will be like, what is a TSX file? I don't know. And it might feel weird, this doesn't seem like a good microservices architecture. I've had arguments before I understood monorepos and even knew they exist as a concept. In my first company, this was a very big argument. Should we create front-end and back-end in different repositories or same repositories? The answer is the same repository is the final solution here, because it's easier to have all your code in the same place. It's easier to just run yarn dev one command at the very top here, which starts your front end also, back end also, versus, you know, asking developers to install two other repositories. So at the high level, it turns out to be the better solution. Follow up, could we manually add star in the dependency version and not have relative paths? You could do that. Yes, you could do that. You can manually, not, that won't work without turbo repo. Or like if you're not using a monorepo, that won't work. But you can do other things. In TS configs, you can add relative paths. You can do something like this. So if I go to TS config anywhere, let's open the original project we were talking about. I keep moving from one project to another. Here, rather than doing this, you could, why is this complaining now? Never mind. Rather than doing this, you could also in TS config of server add something called references, and describe like something called paths somewhere, where you can just simply be like something similar to at common slash common at 100x dev slash common points to dot dot slash wherever. That works as well. Monorepos are just like the standard to do this, but you could totally modify your TS config a little bit and then simply use this throughout your project without having to bring it from npm. Docs and web are different applications. If we make course selling application, then can we run them at the same time? Yes, you can. Just run yarn dev in the root folder. It will start one at port 3000. It will start the other one at the port 3001. Can you elaborate where the backend and front end is in the turbo repo? Sure, I can simply just take you through. So the turbo repo that we installed does not have backend. It is a pure front end turbo repo. If you want a backend turbo repo, you will see here a bunch of examples. Start from an example, and one of them, this kitchen sink example, has both the front end and the back end. So if I open this, you will see it has a top level apps folder which has API. If you look at API, it's a simple Express app basically. Create server from /server. So if I go to server, you will see Express. So the one that we use, the one that turbo repo gives you by default, does not have a backend app. If you go to kitchen sink here, I'll just post this in chat. This has both front end and a backend, and it also has a bunch of other things. So you can look at the backend code here. Opening chat again. Is .ts code or JS logic? It is TypeScript. It is TypeScript code. If you look at it, it's .d.ts, so it does end with ts, but it doesn't contain any JS logic. So it never executes anything. There is no line by line running that happens here. If you have a for loop in your .ts file, it won't appear in your .d.ts file. If you have a console.log, it won't appear. Only your final types appear, which means if you have defined your interface, defined a type, and exported it, you will see that in the .d.ts file. You won't, if you've exported a function, you will just see the signature of the function, not the actual body. So at CI/CD time, monorepos help you build fast. That is also true. Yeah, you could say that. At CI/CD time, monorepos help you build fast. Why would that be? It's because you have the code in the same place. Yeah, you could say that. It doesn't need to pull code from someplace else. You also always have the latest code. If we went with the process of deploying to npm, then you always have to get your latest code from npm in your CI/CD pipeline. So yeah, you could say that. When does the open source contribution start? It starts probably in 2 weeks. So the next 1 week, probably Next.js and maybe TRPC, and then open source contributions. दोबारा करना पड़ेगा, ऊपर से जा रहा है. So if you did not understand this, felt overwhelming, only one thing you really need to focus on is turbo repos and understanding the structure of a general full stack application in one stack, which is you have a top level. Can I need to open the other one? You have a top level apps and you have a top level packages. This contains a bunch of your small packages. If you really look at it, it just has a UI package, which we have used, which defined a signup.tsx component. Why is this cool? Because your apps, which we now have two, a web app and another docs app, can both use the sign up component. That's really the only thing you need to take from the video. Although it's nice to know how to publish to npm. Cool. Is it just the type definition? You could say that .d.ts is just it's called the declaration. So yeah, or like type definition. Yes. Isn't that component, and were we able to access it from wherever? How is it different? I think your question isn't this. Sorry, could you ask your question again, Rahul? Why Turbo? It's the most popular choice. It's written by the Vercel folks. People just use it. Lerna works as well. My last company used Lerna, so there's no real reason what you should pick. Most open source projects, Backpack, Cal.com, use Turbo. Yeah. Is .d.ts similar to abstract? I think you mean abstract classes in Java, and the answer is almost yes. It's like, yeah, it gives you the signature of all the functions, all the types. What if we deploy frontend and backend on different servers? How does that work with Monorepos? Great question. So Monorepo is just your code, right? When your code gets pushed to GitHub, it's a good question that actually is a very sort of long question to answer, because there are a lot of problems that come when you try to deploy from a monorepo to a frontend and a backend. If this is your monorepo, which has both frontend and your backend code, usually what happens is your CI/CD pipeline checks if there was a change either in the frontend code or in some module like UI which uses the front-end code, it starts your front-end deployment. Now, what is the front-end deployment? It could clone the whole repo. It could clone just, apps/web and packages/UI. That really depends on how you've written the CI/CD pipeline. You could just clone the whole repo, just build the yarn application, the front-end application you want to deploy, and just deploy it. The only problem that comes here is if there is a change made in the backend code, the front-end shouldn't redeploy, and vice versa. So for that, in the CI/CD pipeline, you can add some checks. Okay, only if this path changed should you redeploy front-end and backend. Everything else is the same. You can, on the backend server, pull the whole repo and just run the backend application. Won't really break anything. Vice versa for front-end. Cal.com uses Prisma and Postgres. Will you teach this, or should we start learning them? I might teach Prisma. We might learn SQL as well. It really depends on what open source projects we pick. And if Cal.com is one, which might be one, then it might be good for me to teach Prisma. Else it'll just be very overwhelming. So there might be classes on Next, Prisma, maybe even SQL or Postgres, because if we go with Cal.com, then yeah, it'll be very hard to understand it without knowing these, and it'll just be overwhelming. Cool. Any more question, guys? Opening the chat again. Sorry, someone asked another question. By using monorepos, when I deploy my website to Netlify or some other deploying website, will my backend code also get deployed? Not really. When you deploy using Vercel or Netlify, you probably cannot. I think these are serverless applications that let you deploy backend if you've written backend using Next.js. But if you're using writing backend purely using Express, I don't think these let you deploy backends, and they won't most probably understand it. Maybe they've recently introduced this, I don't know. But from what I know until now, they only support sort of front ends, which means Next.js applications, React, you will be able to deploy. Even though you have your Node.js code there, they won't deploy it. Alrighty. How to deploy everything in the same folder? Does it spit out? Yeah. So it spits out different bundles. If I run a high level yarn build, with the right video, right? Yeah, if I run a yarn build here, it will independently build my apps/web and apps/whatever docs, and then I can independently deploy them. They don't. A single distribution file is not created, as you can see. Where does Next.js create your files? There you go. Like the final distribution, wherever it is created in Next, will be independent for both of these applications, so you can deploy them independently. How do you deploy it when? Okay, I think you answered that. Doesn't components do the same thing? Yeah, so React components do the same thing, but again, yeah, you could say that. Okay, but like you could say functions also do the same thing, right? You define functions in different files, you export them, you import them. So that's just a primitive of any language for you to export and import them. The fact that you can export them across modules is what sort of Turbo Repo provides you. Can we have monorepo with React and Python in the backend? The answer is no, because there's no point. There's no code that they will share, right? So if you have a Python backend here, it'll just be weird. No one does that. If you want that, it'll be like a separate. You'll have a application that looks like our original application, where there are two folders. One contains your Node.js or your complete monorepo, and the other one contains your Python app. Can you please structure them all? I mean, what should be done first in Turbo, or state management, or types? Okay, you should probably first forget Turbo and simply understand state management and TypeScript. Turbo Repo should come very later. It's a very nice high level abstraction, so you don't have to worry about understanding anything there. You should just focus on TypeScript and state management first. So by using Monorepos, when I deploy my website to Netlify or other deploying website, will my backend? Okay, I think I answered that. No, your backend won't be deployed. Before open source, can you explain CI/CD? Sure, we can add a class for that. Cool, guys. Any more questions? Sorry. Bare metal, probably not. If I have a backend app and one Next.js app in a turbo repo, okay, after deployment, does it set up 2 node instances, one for backend, one for next, as the renders React one server side too? Okay, so it depends on how you're creating your backend. If you are creating your backend using Next, then it will be on a single server, or like more specifically, if you deploy it on Vercel, then it's serverless. It actually has a bunch of servers around the world where your code runs. But if you have an Express application, then it will be Express backend running on a different server. You can run them on the same server if you want, but if you're using a service like Vercel, they too cannot only run backends from what I know. So you have to deploy it separately on an AWS machine or whatever, and then front end will be on Next.js or wherever. So yeah, short answer, different machines, unless your API is written in Next.js APIs. That's what you use for the backend. Today's class seems hard to implement as they've learned to code these type of things, didn't have any structure. Okay, good feedback. I will probably just code everything from scratch in an offline video, and then hopefully it's clearer. Can we have an application with Next.js, Node.js, and React Native and Expo? Yes. In fact, if you go to the turbo repo examples, you'll find one which has React Native. I don't know if it has backend, but you can simply just add backend there. If you go to examples here, you will see a React Native app somewhere here. There you go. Cool. Just 2 side questions. I want to go through some concepts later. Will the video be available after the course ends? Yeah, the videos will be here. Videos you have access for like a year or something like that. Are the non-development... Okay, I think that's outside for the scope of the project. It's like today's class. We can answer those questions on Discord. Anything else related to the class, guys? Oops class. JavaScript oops are like completely disjoint. JavaScript doesn't use too many oops concepts. So probably not needed for the course. Can we make changes in the monorepo which is deployed so the backend server will go down as well as the address? If we make any changes to the monorepo which is deployed, so the backend server will go down as well to the address the new code. If you do a deployment, your backend server will go down and restart immediately if only backend was changes. If you have written the CI/CD pipeline right, only if the front end, if there is a change that is made in the front end code, will the front end code redeploy. I don't know if that was exactly the question that you asked. Can we deploy monorepos using Vercel? You can. You just have to select the root folder as to where your specific app is. So if you want to deploy the admin website, you have to select, okay, this is where my admin website is, and vice versa. When to use monorepo, when to use micro frontend. What is a micro frontend? I'm not sure what that is. Please teach TRPC, sure. Should be like an hour thing. Because frankly, if you have to type into cal.com, then you need TRPC. What is ESLint? Video will come this week. It's just something that lets you do linting in your project. What is linting? It's just how your code looks, how many spaces, tabs you have, so on and so forth. Alrighty, cool guys. Hopefully this was clear. I know this was advanced, meant to be advanced. Frankly, this was supposed to be the last class before we start open source, but we have to do a bunch of other things now. TRPC, Next.js, yada yada yada, which we will do before we start open source. So thank you everyone for joining, and a bunch of offline videos might come this week, where I can probably recap what I've done today, and then ESLint, and then maybe Next.js. Then we can go from there. Cool guys, thank you everyone. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.